Hello and welcome to WION Live, broadcast from London. I'm Olly Barratt, and over the next 30 minutes I'll be bringing you updates on stories from around the world with a particular focus on Geneva. The stage is set and the summit has kicked off inside an 18th century villa. A high-stakes face-off is underway. US President Joe Biden and Russian President Vladimir Putin are meeting as we speak in Geneva. Before we give you more on what's expected from that summit, let's take a look at the headlines. And Joe Biden and Vladimir Putin are facing off for this historic summit in Geneva. The talks could last several hours and they'll be followed by separate news conferences from the two leaders. The Speaker of Pakistan's National Assembly suspends 7 lawmakers over the ruckus on Tuesday when members from Treasury and opposition benches nearly came to blows during the budget session. India's IT minister slams Twitter for failing to comply with government policies, tweeting that it deliberately chose non-compliance. According to sources, Twitter has lost its legal protection in India. The European Union agrees to lift coronavirus travel restrictions on travellers from the United States. The development comes a day after the US-EU summit in Brussels. India's COVID caseload continues to show a downward trend with over 62,000 cases and 2,500 deaths reported in the last 24 hours. This as several states across the nation ease COVID curbs. And the mayor of Moscow orders mandatory vaccination of all residents in the Russian capital amid a dramatic surge in cases. Moscow reported over 6,800 new COVID cases on Tuesday. Both Joe Biden and Vladimir Putin are in Geneva for an historic summit. They were greeted by the Swiss President Guy Parmelin. The two are currently at the 18th century villa in Geneva for what could be a high-stakes face-off. Let's look at some live pictures from the Villa Lagrange, where the meeting is set to continue over the course of the coming hours. Heading into the talks, both leaders said they hope that those discussions can lead to more stable and predictable relations. This, though, as the US and Russia remain at odds over almost everything from arms control and cyber hacking to election interference and Ukraine.
You guys. No.
It is very much showdown time for Joe Biden and Vladimir Putin as the US and Russia remain at an historic crossroads. Relations between the two remind many observers of the frosty Cold War era. Now, there are no great expectations from the meeting. Amid the plummeting bilateral ties, it's considered by many an achievement in itself that the discussions are taking place. But for many, the optics are equally important. Joe Biden arrived in Geneva after a packed European tour. He rallied G7 leaders here in the UK to make tough calls. He stressed the importance of NATO in Brussels, and he pushed his America is back stance as well. For Joe Biden, it's about trying to show a united front from the West, an early political trial for his nascent presidency. The idea of like-minded democracies uniting against a common adversary. Putin's main goal is not necessarily, though, to warm up ties, but to draw and negotiate a tense status quo. It's one that could protect Moscow's vital interests. The Russian president's task for now could be considered modest: to spell out Russia's top security concerns, to try and restore basic channels of communication, and also to attempt to prevent an even more dangerous destabilisation. The main red line for Moscow is Ukraine's aspirations to join NATO, the military alliance. But Vladimir Putin could show some flexibility on other issues like climate change, for example.
Putin, like the leader of any country, undoubtedly sets red lines, and in this respect, President Putin does this very clearly. I'm sure that in talks with US President Mr. Joe Biden, he will repeat these red lines. Regarding the agenda, it includes bilateral relations. We have many for the Americans regarding bilateral relations. This includes strategic stability, arms control, cooperation in regional conflicts, cooperation on the pandemic which continues, and we can't ignore climate questions. The agenda is very broad.
So expectations are very limited then, but is the bar too high for this meeting? Nonetheless, the two countries have lots of issues on which they disagree, and it's unlikely that they'll be solved with just one summit. The two have tensions to deal with and plenty to talk about. As I say, from the Russian military involvement in Ukraine to the cyber hacking incidents that the US has been complaining about. Despite the historic setting of the meet and the optics that people are watching so carefully, very few people expect that Joe Biden and Vladimir Putin will come to any significant agreements or set a tone like Gorbachev and Reagan did in 1985. For now, it's unlikely the tensions will be eased anytime soon in a major way. The setting is a historic villa in Geneva. That's where this historic summit is taking place. And while it may be picturesque, the face-off it awaits could well be grueling. Let's take a look now at where the two presidents are currently holding their talks.
Located in one of Geneva's biggest parks is this 18th century lakeside villa named Villa Lagrange. Surrounded by cedars, it looks over a scenic view of Lake Geneva. Steeped in history, this is the venue of the Biden-Putin Summit. The villa is a former grand family home. It was built in the 1660s by the merchant Jacques Franconis. While it has changed several hands since then, the villa has played a pivotal role in Swiss diplomacy. Hosting showpiece events is not new to the villa. It has played a key role in landmark agreements before. The most notable one is the First Geneva Convention. In 1921, a reception was held in Villa Lagrange for the first Red Cross conference after World War I. But the Biden-Putin Summit is the biggest event Villa Lagrange has hosted in centuries. Switzerland has deployed its army to repair the villa, deploying thousands of police and troops to protect it. Geneva authorities issued a decree fixing the secure zone, with temporary security fencing erected around the parks.
The access and the lakefront will be completely locked down on the 16th for about 24 hours. No pedestrians, no vehicles, no boats. Trade boats will not be allowed to navigate. We want to avoid any problems here.
The villa has seen a whirlwind of activity since the announcement. Paint has been touched up, chandeliers polished, and antique furniture rearranged. In the immaculately manicured gardens, new turf has been rolled out to cover any bare patches. The summit venue reminds many of another iconic villa, the 19th century mansion Fleur d'Or in Versoix, the venue of the Reagan-Gorbachev summit in 1985, where the two agreed to pursue cuts in their nuclear arsenal.
In Geneva, we need to go back to 1985 for the last meeting between Presidents Reagan and Gorbachev. The security challenges are set by the quality of the host, but also by the political context in both countries, by their relationship, and by the local context which could bring about social action in Switzerland.
For Switzerland, this is an iconic moment. It's a return to the center of diplomacy. This is the first big power summit in the Alpine country in decades. For years, Geneva has been known for its neutral stance, and all eyes remain on Villa-Lagrange right now. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
Strained ties have been evident for some time. Back in March 2021 was when the newly elected US president revealed his approach towards Vladimir Putin. Biden pulled no punches at the time as he called the Russian president a killer during a TV interview.
You know Vladimir Putin, you think he's a killer?
Mm-hmm. I do.
You know Vladimir Putin, you think he's a killer?
Mm-hmm. I do.
But just a day before the Geneva summit, the US president appeared to be changing his tone. When asked again if he thought the Russian president is a killer, Biden said that he finds Putin to be bright, tough, and a worthy adversary.
But look, when I was asked that question on air, I answered it honestly. But it's not much of a, I don't think it matters a whole lot in terms of this next meeting we're about to have. He's bright, he's tough, and I have found that he is a, as they say, when he used to play ball, a worthy adversary.
And what about the Russian president? Is he also hoping to avoid unnecessary confrontation ahead of the meeting?
President Biden says, one time when you met, you were inches away from each other. And he said to you, I'm looking in your eyes and I can't see a soul. And you said, we understand each other. Do you remember that exchange?
But I do not remember this particular part of our conversations, to be honest with you. He probably has a good memory.
Biden and Putin do seem to have been on something of a journey since that killer comment, and a tense NATO-Russia military standoff over Ukraine has so far been safely negotiated. While Biden is hoping to avoid further conflict, the US president says he will not, though, fail to protect democratic values.
I shared with our allies that I'll convey to President Putin, that I'm not looking for conflict with Russia, but that we will respond if Russia continues its harmful activities. And we will not fail to defend the transatlantic alliance or stand up for democratic values.
From the height of the Cold War in the 1960s to now, relations between the US and Russia have remained tense. Even after a short-lived thaw achieved in 1985 when Reagan met Gorbachev, successive presidents of the rival nuclear powers have attempted to parley to varying degrees of success and failure. In our next report, we take a look back at these era-defining historic encounters.
Gave the Soviet leader his first look at America. Since the visit was not universally policy.
In what was the first visit by a Soviet leader to the United States, Dwight Eisenhower and Nikita Khrushchev met at Camp David in the September of 1959. Khrushchev came with his family and took the opportunity to tour the country, exploring the cornfields of Iowa as well as Hollywood, where he delivered one of his legendary rants to an audience that included Marilyn Monroe and Elizabeth Taylor. The summit was concluded with a statement that the two superpowers worked towards talks on disarmament and on the status of Berlin that the Cold War had divided.
The site of Vienna in the spring of 1961 is that...
The handsome newbie at the White House, John F. Kennedy, met with wizened experience of Nikita Khrushchev in June 1961 under the Baroque frescoes of former Imperial Schönbrunn Palace, Vienna's Versailles. The summit would prove to be an icy encounter befitting the Cold War era, made chillier by the failed US Bay of Pigs invasion of Cuba that happened shortly before. Berlin was top of the agenda, but 2 months later, the wall dividing the city would be built. A year later, the Cuban Missile Crisis blew up, bringing the world to the brink of nuclear war. 1972. Nixon and Brezhnev. The Vietnam War cast a long shadow over the Moscow summit in May that brought Richard Nixon and Leonid Brezhnev together. A few days before his trip, the US president had ordered massive bombings of Hanoi. But the summit would prove key in ushering in the period of détente between the two superpowers as they signed the SALT and ABM weapons control treaties. In a joint declaration, they said peaceful coexistence was the only basis for relations in a nuclear age. The two men met twice more while they were in power, underlining the thaw in ties, but relations would later chill again with the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in 1979. 1986, Reagan and Gorbachev. In 4 years, Ronald Reagan and Mikhail Gorbachev had 4 summits. Their first encounter took place in Switzerland in 1985, where Reagan, still berating the evil empire and preparing to set up a space between defense system, suggested that he and Gorbachev go for a walk to get some fresh air by Lake Geneva. When they returned, the talk was of chemistry. Reagan found Gorbachev very comfortable, very easy to be with. His wife Nancy later recalled a factor that, with their mutual appreciation, enabled them to throw the arms race into reverse. A year after Geneva, the two superpowers met again in Iceland's capital to discuss eliminating their nuclear arsenals. But the talks collapsed as Washington refused to roll back development of its Star Wars missile defense project, deemed unacceptable by the Kremlin. Yet the summit has since been seen as the harbinger of significant de-escalation and a turning point in the Cold War. It led to a treaty in 1987 under which both powers would eliminate their short and intermediate-range nuclear missiles. Thousands of these weapons were scrapped in what was the first major weapons reduction by the rivals.
Have you made any real progress, sir?
1992. Bush and Yeltsin. Boris Yeltsin was welcomed as a friend by his American host, George Bush, during his first visit to US since the USSR's collapse. The two were at pains to forge a close personal relationship as a basis for economic cooperation between their countries, but also to continue reducing their nuclear arsenals. The summit marked Yeltsin's entrance onto the world stage and the first UN Security Council meeting devoted to the post-Cold War period. 1995, Clinton and Yeltsin. Bill Clinton and Boris Yeltsin held 8 summits during their terms of office, which overlapped during most of the 1990s. Their summits included one in Hyde Park, New York in 1995, where at times the two men, who had many disagreements over the years, seemed to get on like old friends. The summit had brought on no breakthrough agreements, but a remark by Yeltsin at a news conference lightened the mood and caused Clinton to burst into uncontrollable spasms of laughter.
You were writing was that today's meeting with President Bill Clinton was going to be a disaster.
Так вот, не первый раз я вам говорю, что вы провалились.
Well, now for the first time I can tell you that you're a disaster.
Clinton spent several moments trying to compose himself while draping a friendly arm around Yeltsin. The Russian, for his part, had the serene smile of a comic who had just brought the house down. Bureau Report WION, World is One.
Both leaders will have been preparing hard for this meeting. According to reports by Axios, Joe Biden has a team of Russia experts advising him on every move. That team includes Fiona Hill, who is a former member of the US National Security Council. Former ambassadors to Russia under the Obama administration, Michael McFaul and John Teft, and Rose Gottemoeller, who was NATO's Deputy General in the Obama era. According to Axios, the expert teams agreed on an approach that Joe Biden should be adopting, which is, according to Axios, blunt talk leaving no doubt for Putin on where Biden stands, from hacking to human rights. End quote. The bilateral meeting with Vladimir Putin is a crucial challenge for Joe Biden's presidency so far. It could well be a defining point for the US-Russia relationship in the coming years and will determine how ties shape up going forward. While dealing with Moscow, will the US president back his tough talk, though, with tough action, with Beijing and Tehran also keeping a close eye on the developments? President Biden will have to set the right tone for both friends and foes.
de vous accueillir pour ce sommet. Elle est heureuse de pouvoir ainsi, conformément.
During his tenure, Vladimir Putin has met 4 US presidents, from the frosty Obama-Putin Summit of 2016 to a Trump-Putin Summit in 2018 that some thought was too friendly. Here's a look at all the presidential encounters that Vladimir Putin has had so far.
In 2001, the newly appointed US President George W. Bush travelled all the way to Slovenia to meet the newly appointed Russian President Vladimir Putin. This summit was aimed at resolving differences spanning decades. The warmth between the two new faces in global politics surprised many. A few months later, in the wake of the 9/11 attacks, Putin is said to have been one of the first world leaders to offer Bush support in the war against terrorism. But the friendship didn't last. America's support for NATO enlargement is said to have angered Russia. Moscow later objected to the American invasion of Iraq in 2003. In 2016, outgoing US President Barack Obama had a frosty interaction with Putin, who had now been in power for 16 years. Their meeting took place on the sidelines of the G20 summit in China. Russia's territorial aggressions in Ukraine, its ongoing crackdown on domestic dissidents, and rumors that it was seeking to meddle in the 2016 US presidential polls cast a shadow on the discussions. This was illustrated by the ice-cold stares the two men gave each other. But if Obama saw Russians as clear-cut villains, the next president's attitude seemed quite the opposite. In 2018, Donald Trump met with Vladimir Putin in Helsinki and contradicted all notions of Russia meddling in America's internal affairs. The notion of an American president giving Putin's denial more importance than the work of the US intelligence community angered many. Trump was forced to walk back on his comments. Putin, who has been in power for 20 years, will now be meeting his 4th US president in Joe Biden, who will naturally be coming with a list of grievances. Is Biden's changing tone an indication of America's changing approach? We shall learn soon enough. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
And that is all we have time for on today's WION Live broadcast, a special show dedicated almost entirely to that Biden-Putin summit that is underway in Geneva as we speak. WION continues to track all the live updates from those discussions in Switzerland. Do stay tuned on WION for more on the high-stakes summit. I've been Olly Barratt reporting from London. Stay with WION.
Many other. This is right, Arab.